In this video, we'll take a look at 4 command line commands that I'm broadly grouping into a category of commands that can be useful for getting information about the files you're working with. This information might be about properties of the file itself or contents of the file. The commands are ls, wc, MD5, and diff. To follow along on your own, you can download the example files I'm using from the address on the screen, which is also in a comment pinned to this video. The files represent two versions of a set of DNA sequence data in FASTQ format. The file example1.fq contains the raw data, and example1 trimmed FQ is a version of the same data in which hypothetical adapter sequences have been identified and trimmed off. The red boxes highlight differences in the files. Notice the sequences in the boxes are shorter in the trimmed file than in the original. Outside of what's in those boxes, the files are the same. FASTQ format is common for next-generation sequencing data, but in case it's not familiar to you, there are just a couple characteristics about FASTQ files to know for this video. The first is that most are really big, much bigger than these example files, which each have 40 lines of text. In practice, it would be more common to work with FASTQ files containing tens to hundreds of millions of lines of data, putting them on the order of hundreds of megabytes or often gigabytes in size. These sizes mean they can be difficult, if not impossible, to work with in a traditional text editor, so command line approaches are often necessary. Let's say we wanted to get some information about one of these files. Outside of command line, we might right-click on the file and choose an option like Properties or Get Info that would open a window with various types of information, including the size of the file, when it was last modified, and its permissions. One way to do something similar at command line is to utilize the ls command. We've already seen this in previous videos as a way to list files in a directory. In this case, though, we're going to use it in combination with the -l argument, which will modify its behavior to not only list the files in the directory, but also return several pieces of information about each file. This includes much of the same information we just saw outside the terminal window. For example, the read, write, and execute file permissions are listed for the user, who in this case has read and write permissions, but the files aren't executable, the group, which has just read permissions, and everyone, also read permission for each of these two files. Other information listed includes the size of the file in bytes and the date the file was last modified. For big files, you might want to include the -h argument with the command, which in this case stands for human readable. This reformats the file size column to make it a little easier to interpret. So, using the -l argument with the ls command gives some general properties of a file. Now we'll turn our attention to the contents of the file. One command I find myself using a lot is the wc or word count command. In its most basic form, this command returns the number of lines, words, and bytes in a file. For example, wc example1.fq shows there are 40 lines, 50 words, and 1620 bytes in this file. Words are defined as any sets of characters separated by whitespace. For example, if we preview this file with head and look at the first 4 lines, we see that in line 1, there is a single space. So, in these 4 lines, WC sees 5 words, 2 on the first line and 1 on each of the next 3. In a FASTQ formatted file like this, each DNA sequence in the file is represented by 4 lines. So this same pattern is repeated 10 times in this file to get the 40 lines and 50 words. When I use the WC command, I'm typically specifically interested in the number of lines in the file. So I often use WC-L to get that specific item returned, which again shows the 40 lines. The third command we'll check out in this video is MD5 or MD5 sum. These both have the same function. If you're working on a Mac OS X system, the MD5 command will probably work for you. If you're on another system, you'll likely use MD5 sum. Regardless of the one you use, the command is pointed to a specific file. Here, I've run the MD5 command on example1.fq, and it returns a set of 32 characters that are specific to the contents of that file. This set of characters is referred to as the MD5 checksum. If the file remains unchanged and the MD5 command is run again, the exact same set of characters will be returned. However, if just a single character is changed in the file, the MD5 checksum will be a completely different set of 32 characters. A common use of this command is to check the integrity of a file transfer, especially for large files. For example, imagine you're getting a file from an online repository. If the repository has made the checksum available for the file on their end, you can use the MD5 command to get the checksum for the file you downloaded and make sure those two checksums match. If they do, you can be sure you got a complete and exact copy of the file. The final command we'll look at in this video is diff. The diff command has some similarity to the MD5 command we just looked at, in the sense that it also allows you to compare the contents of two files. The difference in the two commands lies in the fact that MD5 provides a binary outcome. Either the files are different or they aren't. In contrast, diff details what aspects are different between the two files. I'm going to start by running diff with a couple of arguments, -y and -- suppress -common -lines. Of course, I also have to give it two file names to compare, which are my example1.fq and example1trim.fq. In this case, the output is printed to the screen in two panels. The left panel shows the contents of the example1.fq file, and the right panel has the contents of example1trimmed.fq. This side-by-side format is specified by the -y option. The -- suppress common lines argument directed the command to only print the lines in the two files that differ from each other. These are the lines that were highlighted in the red boxes earlier in the video. In a more basic form, the diff command, when run without arguments, returns the same information, but reformatted to indicate detailed changes on a line-by-line basis. For example, line 14 is changed between the two files, with the contents of line 14 in file 1 printed above the contents of line 14 in file 2, and so on. If you're viewing these videos in sequence, we've now gone over viewing files at command line, and in this video, getting information about files, both the properties of file and its contents. One thing we haven't yet addressed is how to create and edit files within the command line environment. Consider checking out the video on using the Nano text editor next for one example of how to do that.